Hey everyone, let's talk about something that might sound a little dry at first glance, but is actually absolutely crucial for the health of our neighborhoods. We are talking about environmental chemical reporting, specifically the federal rules that tell companies exactly how they need to track the chemicals they use. I know, regulatory compliance isn't exactly the most thrilling phrase, but let's look at it a totally different way today. Instead of seeing it as just another bureaucratic headache, think of it as a huge step toward community transparency. It's really just about being a good corporate neighbor.
I completely get that federal rules can seem super overwhelming, but don't worry, we've got a really simple roadmap for you. We're going to cover why this rule matters, whether or not you're required to report, how to calculate your chemical footprint, some key exemptions, the basics of filing and keeping records, and finally, what it costs if you don't comply. Let's jump right in. All right, part one, why this rule actually matters and the community's right to know. Before we get into all the math and the forms, you really have to understand the core intent behind this law. Imagine you're at the grocery store checking the nutrition label on a box of cereal. You want to know exactly how much sugar is in there, right? Well, think of this reporting rule as a mandatory nutrition label, but for your local environment. Communities absolutely have a legal right to know what kinds of chemicals are being processed, used, and maybe even released into the air they breathe or the water they drink. And this isn't just data sitting in some dusty filing cabinet. Public health officials actually use these numbers for research to help shape safety guidelines and to just generally keep residents informed about what's happening right in their own backyards. Moving right along to part two, are you even required to report? Let's figure out your facility's status. Honestly, I want you to ask yourself right now, does this apply to you? Take a quick mental inventory of your own workplace or the facility you help run. The reality is, not every single business out there has to file these forms. The government actually has a very specific set of criteria to separate the smaller mom-and-pop shops from the heavy industrial players. Okay, so here's the deal. For your facility to be on the hook, you need to check 3 specific boxes. First up, you've got to have 10 or more full-time workers. If you're a tiny 5-person startup, you can basically breathe easy. Second, your business has to operate under specific industrial codes, things like manufacturing, metal mining, or certain types of chemical distribution. And third, you have to be processing or using chemicals that are actually on the government's watch list and using them above certain volume limits over the calendar year. Now, this is absolutely crucial to remember. All 3 of these things must be true for the mandatory rules to kick in.
So, part 3, calculating your chemical footprint and what it means to cross that threshold. If you hit those first 2 requirements, meaning you have the staff size and you're in the right industry, it all comes down to crunching the numbers. The EPA actually looks at how you interact with a chemical, and that changes how much of it you're allowed to have before you have to report it. On one side, you've got manufacturing or processing. This means you're intentionally making a chemical, importing it, or actually building it right into a product you sell. On the flip side, you have otherwise using. This is basically when you use a chemical as a tool to get the job done, like a strong solvent to clean your machines, but that chemical doesn't actually go out the door as part of your final product. To put that into perspective, here are the standard baseline numbers you're dealing with. If you're manufacturing or processing a regulated chemical, your limit is 25,000 pounds per year. If you're just otherwise using it as a tool, that limit drops to 10,000 pounds. Now, 25,000 pounds might sound like a massive amount, but trust me, in a busy plant, you can hit that incredibly fast. Also, a quick heads up here, if you're dealing with highly toxic chemicals that linger in the environment, you can basically throw these numbers out. Those specific chemicals have drastically lower limits and require some serious microscopic tracking. Which brings us to part 4, exemptions and special rules. Basically, when you don't have to report. What's really great here is that there's actually a lot of common sense baked into these rules. You don't have to track every single drop of everything in your building. First, let's cut through the government jargon. There's an exemption for an article. What does that mean in plain English? Basically, if you buy a solid item that already has a specific shape, like a big sheet of steel or a metal pipe, and it doesn't release any toxic chemicals while you use it normally, you do not have to count the chemicals trapped inside that metal. You're just using the physical object itself. Aside from articles, there are a bunch of everyday exemptions so you don't pull your hair out over the small stuff. You don't need to report tiny fractional amounts mixed into products, usually anything under 1%. You completely ignore the cleaning supplies your janitors use to mop up the floors. You don't count the oil or antifreeze used to keep your company delivery vans running. And if you've got a small lab doing qualified research, those chemicals are generally off the books too. So really, don't sweat the Windex in the break room. Just keep your eyes on the big industrial volumes. All right, part 5, filing and record-keeping basics. Let's do some paperwork. If you ran the numbers and you do cross the thresholds, here's how you actually comply. It's basically a 3-step process. Step 1. All year long, you've got to accurately track your volumes, how you manage the chemicals, and any releases into the environment. Step 2 is the big one. You have to officially submit your data to the EPA and your state by the strict deadline of July 1st for the previous year. And a huge note here. The EPA requires you to do this all digitally now through their specific online software. No more mailing in huge binders of paper. And finally, Step 3. Securely file all that supporting documentation. Think of this exactly like your personal taxes. You wouldn't just file your return and immediately throw away all your receipts, right? Under these rules, you have to keep copies of your reports, all your underlying math, the raw data, and any reasons you claimed exemptions right there at your facility for 3 full years. If an inspector shows up unannounced, you absolutely have to be able to pull those files and prove your math. And finally, Part 6, the cost of non-compliance and why this is so incredibly serious. Okay, brace yourself for a bit of sticker shock here. If you break these rules, whether you just totally forgot to report, you kept messy records, or you tried to hide a chemical release, you can be hit with a maximum statutory civil penalty of $25,000. But here's the absolute kicker. That is not a one-time flat fee. That fine can hit you for every single day that you are in violation. If you've been doing it wrong for months or years, those daily fines stack up so fast they could literally cripple a business. Trust me, paying someone to do the math up front is way, way cheaper than dealing with those fines later. And that really brings us to the bottom line here. Environmental transparency is a massive pillar of corporate responsibility. So how confident are you in your facility's chemical footprint right now? Are there liabilities quietly sitting on your warehouse floor? Take this as a sign to double-check your operations, chat with your safety team, and make sure you're doing your part to keep your neighborhood safe and transparent. Thanks so much for hanging out with me for this overview, and good luck with your reporting.
If you found this helpful or want to stay updated when this regulation changes, subscribe and support the channel. And if you need the full technical details on this CFR, click the link in the description below. See you next time.